No, you don't own me. You can't buy me.
No,
When
you.
the richest man in Texas paid 3 months of my daughter's school in advance, he thought he was saving me. He just didn't imagine I would return every penny, and that I was the only person in the world who remembered who he was, before the money. Before we get into this, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this video from? I always love reading the comments, so let me know down below. Now let's go back to where it all started. I had 3 days to pay the rent, or I was going to lose my apartment. It wasn't the first time I was in this situation, but it was the first time I looked at my bank account and saw a number that didn't cover even half of what I owed. Brooke was sleeping in the next room, completely unaware, just like every 7-year-old should be. And I was sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night with a pile of bills in front of me and 0 solutions in sight. That was the night the phone rang. It was the supervisor from the agency where I was registered as a maid. She said there was a different kind of proposal, live-in arrangement, fixed salary, 3 times what I made in a month. An executive in Austin was looking for someone trustworthy to take care of his residents exclusively. She said he had specifically asked for my profile, that he had seen my record at the agency and wanted to interview me. I asked his name. She said, Ethan Caldwell. I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then I said I would think about it, and hung up. Ethan Caldwell. I knew that name. Everyone in Austin knew that name. Caldwell Industries, infrastructure, construction, energy. One of the richest men in Texas, 32 years old, single, rarely photographed, frequently mentioned in the business pages. But I knew that name for another reason. Ethan Caldwell had grown up in Seattle, on the same street where my grandmother lived, in the house around the corner, and the summer I was 15 and he was 17, we spent 3 whole months inseparable. The way it only happens at that age, when time feels infinite, and you still don't know that things end. On the last day of that summer, before his family moved away, he looked at me in a way I never forgot. He didn't say much, but the way he looked at me said everything. 15 years had passed since that day. I called the supervisor back and said I would take the interview. The interview happened 2 days later, in a boardroom in downtown Austin. I expected to find an assistant, someone from HR, anyone but him. But when the door opened, it was Ethan. He looked different. Of course he did. 15 years change anyone. Taller than I remembered, more closed off, with that posture of someone who has spent his whole life controlling everything around him. But there was something in his eyes that I recognized immediately. He recognized me too. He didn't fake surprise. He just pointed to the chair across from him and told me to sit. The interview lasted 40 minutes. He was professional, direct, specific about the responsibilities. At the end, he said the salary was negotiable, that there was a room for me and my daughter on the property, and that I could start the following week if I wanted. I asked why he had specifically requested my profile. He didn't look away. He said my record at the agency was flawless, that he demanded trust above all else. I knew right then that wasn't the real answer. But I needed the job. I needed it badly. I said I accepted. I signed the papers, and I walked out of that room without looking back. That night, lying on the floor of my apartment, because I'd already sold my bed to pay a light bill, I looked at the ceiling and thought about everything that was about to enter my life. I knew Ethan Caldwell was no longer the 17-year-old boy who taught me how to fish in a Seattle lake on an August Saturday. What I didn't know yet was how much he had changed and how much that was going to cost both of us. The property was way too big for just one person. That was my first thought when the agency car dropped me off at the entrance. A 2-story house surrounded by trees, a 4-car garage, a garden kept with that artificial precision of someone who pays top dollar to make everything look perfect. Everything was beautiful, and everything was very cold. Patricia, the house manager, welcomed me at the door. She showed me the rooms with the efficiency of someone who had done it 100 times. She explained the schedules, the boss's preferences, the rules. She said Ethan didn't like noise before 7 in the morning, that the second-floor office was strictly off-limits, and that he expected everything to be in perfect order whenever he came back from a trip, regardless of the time. Brooke stayed quiet during the whole tour, holding my hand, looking at everything with that serious expression kids get when they're trying to understand the size of the world. Ethan wasn't home that first day. He arrived the next afternoon. I was in the kitchen when I heard the car in the garage. I stayed in my place, kept doing what I was doing, and waited. He walked in, greeted Patricia, and then walked into the kitchen. He stood at the door for a moment before saying good afternoon. I said good afternoon back without stopping my work. He stood there for a few seconds, as if waiting for me to say something else. When he realized it wasn't going to happen, he walked away. In the following days, we established a silent routine. I took care of the house. He worked or traveled, and we exchanged the absolute minimum of words, professional, distant, the way it needed to be. But there were things I started to notice and couldn't ignore. One morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen table with my name on it. Inside was a gift card for a children's clothing store downtown, $500, no note, no explanation. I left the envelope on his office desk, with a post-it saying it wasn't necessary. 2 days later, a box arrived in the mail addressed to Brooke. School supplies, the most expensive kind. The brand I would never buy. The sender was a store, but the store had no way of knowing my daughter's name. I handed the sealed box back to Patricia and asked her to return it to whoever ordered it. That same night, Ethan came down for dinner with that expression of someone who isn't used to hearing no. He sat at the head of the table, looked at me, and said they were just gifts, that there were no hidden intentions. I told him, with all the politeness I could gather, that I didn't accept gifts from my employer, that I was there to work, and I did it gladly. But that little presents were not part of the deal. He stared at me for a moment. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It was more like surprise, as if he wasn't used to that kind of answer. He just said, "Very well," and went back to his plate. But he didn't stop. The following week, I found out he had called Brooke's school and paid 3 months of tuition in advance. When I confronted him, he said it was a courtesy for his staff, that he did it for everyone. I asked Patricia if he had done the same for other employees. She looked at me with that face of someone who knows more than she says, and told me no. She had never seen him do anything like that before. That night, after Brooke went to sleep, I walked up to his office door and knocked. He told me to come in. He was sitting behind his desk, documents in front of him. He looked at me without moving. I told him I appreciated the gesture with the school, but that I would pay him back, deducted from my salary, and that I expected it to never happen again. He leaned back in his chair. He watched me for a moment, with that calm demeanor of someone who is always calculating his next moves. Then he said I was different from what he expected. I asked what he had expected. He didn't answer. He just said goodnight and went back to his documents. I left the office and closed the door carefully, but as I walked down the stairs, one thing he said kept echoing in my head, different from what he expected. What exactly had he expected? The answer came from a place I didn't expect. There was a cleaning lady who came twice a week. Donna. She had worked for Caldwell Industries for over 10 years. Discreet, efficient. The kind of person who has seen a lot and learned it's better to stay quiet. One afternoon, while we were organizing the linen closet, she made a comment that felt too casual to actually be casual. She said she had never seen Ethan take such an interest in an employee's routine. That usually, he barely knew the names of the people who worked for him. I kept folding towels without answering. Then Donna said, still in that tone of someone just making small talk, that months ago, She had overheard Ethan on the phone in the hallway. He was talking to someone about a woman. He said he was waiting for the right moment, that if her situation improved, he would walk away. But if it got worse, he could help. I stopped folding the towel. Donna didn't say anything else. She grabbed her pile and left the closet. I stood there, processing what I had just heard. He knew about my financial situation before he hired me. He knew I was at my breaking point, and he had waited, or worse, calculated the exact moment I would be vulnerable enough to accept the offer. I felt something tighten in my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was that cold clarity you get when you finally understand what's really going on. That night, I waited for Ethan to come down for dinner. I left Brooke watching TV in her room, went downstairs, and sat at the table before him. When he walked into the dining room and saw me sitting there, he froze for a second. Then he pulled out his chair and sat down. I asked him directly if he had monitored my situation before hiring me. He didn't look away. He stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said he had asked an assistant to run a basic background check, that it was standard protocol for live-in staff. I told him I knew it wasn't standard protocol. That standard protocol didn't include knowing I was about to lose my apartment. He stayed silent. I asked if he hired me because he thought my situation made me easier to control. The word hung in the air between us for a long time. Ethan rested his elbows on the table and looked at me with that expression I still couldn't fully decode. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said no. He said he hired me because it was the only way he could find to be near me, that he knew it was wrong, that he knew he hadn't handled it right, but that for 15 years, he knew where I was, how I was doing, and he had kept his distance because he had no right to just show up in my life out of nowhere. He said when he saw I was struggling, something inside him just couldn't stand still. I asked why he sent the gifts then, why he paid my daughter's school without asking me. He stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, with an honesty that seemed to cost him something, that he was used to solving problems with money, that it was the only tool he knew, that he thought it would be simple. He thought it would be simple. I stood up from the table slowly. I told him I wasn't a problem to be solved, that my daughter wasn't a bill to be paid, and that if this was how he understood the people around him, then I needed to start looking for another job. I walked up the stairs without waiting for an answer. But in my head, as I climbed those steps, there was one question I couldn't silence. For 15 years, he knew where I was. Why did he wait so long? I didn't look for another job. Not right then. Not because I changed my mind about what Ethan did, but because Brooke had adapted to her new school. She was making friends. She was sleeping well, eating well. There was a stability in her routine that I didn't want to destroy, over a situation I hadn't fully processed yet. So I stayed. But I set a boundary that he respected, at least for a few days. It was Brooke, once again, who complicated things. My daughter had decided, with that quiet autonomy kids have, that she liked Ethan, not in a dramatic way, just in that natural way kids do. They don't see hierarchy, they don't see tension, they don't see the baggage adults carry. She simply liked him. And he, the man I had seen treat his staff with clinical coldness, treated my daughter with a patience that disarmed me every time I saw it. One Saturday afternoon, he was in the garden when Brooke walked out the back door with a ball in her hands. I was watching from the kitchen window. She walked up to him and asked if he knew how to play. He said it had been a long time, but he could try. They stayed in the garden for almost an hour. I stood at that window longer than I should have. That night, after Brooke went to sleep, Ethan was out on the porch when I came down. This time I didn't try to avoid him. I pulled up a chair and sat down. He didn't say anything. He just waited. I asked him, why did he wait 15 years? He understood the question immediately. He stared out at the dark garden for a moment. Then he said he had tried to find me when he was in his early 20s, that my grandmother had given him an email address I didn't use anymore, that he gave up and told himself it was better that way, that life moved on, the company grew, and he became someone he wasn't sure I would even recognize. I asked what he meant by that. He said money changes people in ways you don't notice while it's happening. You start thinking you can control things, that you can anticipate, prepare, buy the solution before the problem even appears. He had done that his whole life, with everything and everyone around him. He said when he saw me in that interview room, his first thought was that he was going to fix my situation, just like he fixed everything else. I asked if he ever considered that I wasn't a situation to be fixed. He said he hadn't, and that was the part he was ashamed of. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said my name, Megan, not the employee, not you, my name, the way he used to say it when we were teenagers, and the world still fit on a dead-end street in Seattle. He said he was wrong, that the way he went about all this was wrong, that if I walked away, he would understand. But he needed me to know. There was never any calculation behind how he felt, that his feelings were the only genuine part of all this, and they always had been. I stared at the garden for a long time before answering. I told him I knew that the problem was never his feelings. The problem was the man he had become without realizing it. A man who used money to push people in the direction he wanted, thinking he was helping when he was actually taking away their choices. I told him I had just walked out of a marriage with a man who also thought he controlled everything. And I swore, when I left that relationship with nothing, that I would never let anyone dictate the size of my space again. Ethan didn't answer right away. He stayed very quiet. Then he said he had heard every single word, and that he didn't have an answer for me right then, but he hoped he'd get the chance to find one. I stood up, said goodnight, and went inside. But this time, walking up the stairs, I wasn't angry. I was thinking about something my grandmother used to say. People don't show you who they are when things are easy. They show you when they realize they were wrong and have to decide what to do about it. I still didn't know what Ethan was going to do, but for the first time since I arrived at that house, I was willing to wait and see. He didn't show up the next day with a ready-made solution. He didn't send flowers, didn't leave an envelope, didn't use any of the tools he had used his whole life to fix things. He simply showed up. The next morning, he was in the kitchen before me, trying to make coffee with the look of someone who had clearly never operated a coffee maker without assistance. The cup was wrong, the measurements were wrong, and there were coffee grounds scattered all over the counter. I walked in, looked at the scene, and without saying a word, grabbed a cloth and started cleaning. He stood to the side. He didn't get out of the way, didn't ask me to take over. He just stayed there. He told me he had called Patricia and canceled any extra gifts or benefits not agreed upon in my contract, that he had ordered his assistant to delete any monitoring files that existed on me, that he did it not because I asked, but because it was what needed to be done. He said these things looking at the counter, not at me, like someone giving an account, not asking for approval. I finished cleaning up the coffee, set up the machine the right way, and we stood in silence, waiting for it to brew. When the cups were full, he asked if I wanted to walk in the garden before Brooke woke up. I said yes. We walked side by side for a while without speaking. The early morning garden had a different light, more honest. At some point, he said he had thought a lot about what I said, about the man he had become, that he hadn't slept much, that he didn't have easy answers because he hadn't built the habit of looking at himself honestly. He said he knew he couldn't erase the past few months, that he had acted with arrogance, thinking he knew what I needed better than I did. But if I allowed it, he wanted to learn how to do things differently. Not as boss and employee. He was specific about that. He said that dynamic was a mistake from the start, that he had created a structure that put us in impossible positions, and it didn't make sense anymore. I asked what he was proposing. He said he wasn't proposing anything. He was asking what I needed, that this time he wanted to listen before acting. I looked at the trees at the back of the garden for a moment. Then I said what I needed was time. That it wasn't an answer he could buy or anticipate. That I needed to see if the man standing in front of me that morning was who he was deciding to be, or just another strategy. He said he understood, and that he would wait. The proof that he meant it didn't come in words. It came on a Tuesday night, a few months later. I walked down to the living room and found one of the richest men in Texas, sitting on the rug in his socks. He was losing terribly at a puzzle game against a 7-year-old, and he was laughing about it. Brooke looked up at me with that serious face of hers and asked, "Mom, is Ethan going to stay?" I looked at him. He looked back at me, waiting for the answer just as much as she was. I smiled and said, "I think so. He's getting better at puzzles." Standing there, I realized there was something light happening inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't absolute certainty, not yet, but it was the first time in years that the future felt like something I wanted to see up close, instead of something I was just trying to survive. I'm Megan, 30 years old, single mom, former maid, living in a house that is no longer too big for just one person. I discovered that sometimes the love of your life waits in silence for far too long. And the question was never if it still existed. The question was always if the two of you would know what to do with it when the time came. I still don't have all the answers. But for the first time, I'm asking the right questions. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps so much to bring new stories every week. I'll see you in the next video.